was designed by Sudarshan. We've had nearly 300 registrations for the events from people all over the world. And we kicked off this morning in such a positive and encouraging way with a Twitter storm that was organized by the Right to Energy Coalition, which saw us trending in Belgium, and we were trending 20th, I think, in Europe. And there was about 500 tweets from politicians, projects, organizations and allies to the cause, which is fantastic. And we've already had people offering to present next year, which is really, really encouraging. So I think all in all, that just goes to show the interest and the drive that we have collectively to come together to act on energy poverty and to make a real difference. So just before I hand back over to Sergio, I want to say thank you to Marine Cornelis, Marilyn Smith, Sergio, Harriet Thompson, Sudarshan Kunwa, Ava Schubert, Axel Galleron, Kieran Pradeep and Martha Myers and Ruth Borrego for their time and effort in conceptualizing, organizing and promoting the event. You guys have been amazing, so thank you. And thank you to everyone who's here today. I'll hand back over to Sergio, who'll kick off the session.
Thank you, Manon, and welcome everyone. It's really nice to be here. I mean, first day of the first session of the International Energy Poverty Action Week. Sort of exciting event, and as Manon just said, I mean, this is very much grassroots, horizontal. Few of us got together from sort of different affiliations, institution networks, trying to put together these series of events to make energy poverty visible and to bring people to discuss about key issues. So I'm here speaking here on behalf of the Engager Cost Action, which is a network of research and practitioners. And this is, let me just share my screen. I have a few slides on, oh, this is not the one. Yeah, so I was saying, I'm here speaking today on behalf of the Engager Cost Action, which is a network of energy poverty researchers and practitioners. When we first started discussing the topics for this International Energy Poverty Action Week, we thought that as Engager Cost Action, it would provide a bit of a framing for the discussions that will take place and will very much revolve around regional global issues. With this aim in mind, we come here to present two toolkits, two documents on which we've been working over the course of the year 2020, 2021. But before going into the detail of the session of those toolkits, just to let you know, because many people here probably don't know about cost actions or the Engager Cost Action. So this is basically a research network that has been operating since the year 2017. It is funded by something called European Cooperation in Science and Technology, which is EU funds directed to the creation of research networks. Back a few years ago, a few people, researchers, and very active on the energy poverty sort of field in Europe, they brought us together, wrote a proposal, kind of sort of reflecting our interests and ideas about what an energy poverty research network should be. They submitted it to this organization, and it got funded. I mean, there were several attempts until it got funded. We got it funded, we kicked it off. The network should have ended its activities by November last year, but because of the pandemic, we had this 6-month extension, which is really handy to do activities like this. So basically, our cost action network is organizing 4 working groups. Each of them dedicated to different research questions or sub-themes. So we have integration and implementation working group 1 and 2, they look into the actual conceptualization and measuring frameworks of energy poverty, are very much in the European context, but trying to have a broader and global sort of perspective on those issues. And then we have working group 3 and 4. Working group 3, which I'm co-leading with Marlies Hesselman, who is with us today, and she will present one of the toolkits, is about emancipatory research and practice. So reaching out to non-academic actors and developing ideas on issues that are of interest for those actors. So say, then innovation, we have here also Professor Katin Grossman and Lydia Zipcic, Dr. Lydia Zipcic, who will tell us about their work on the just transition with the people toolkits, and they belong to this working group 4 on path-breaking perspectives. So this is the two working groups that will be presented their work. A few sort of up-to-date numbers as we are approaching the end of the action. You can see that the significant number of outputs and activities that have taken place over the course of the past 4 years. Significant number of peer-reviewed publications, lots of scientific networking events. Well, we'll share in a minute if we haven't done so. A link to the Engager Cost Action Network website, so that you can have a look and see what we've been up to in the past 4 years. This is a few highlighted items. The COVID energy map with the list with a comprehensive collection of measures that have been put in place by various actors to respond to the emergency conditions created by the pandemic in relation to energy poverty, or this edited book on post-communist Europe. So what are we going to do today? This is the agenda for today. We'll have right after myself, Marlies Hesselman, and working group 3, Engager working group 3 co-lead, presenting the Right to Energy Toolkits. Then we'll have Katin Grossman and Lydia Zipcic presenting their Just Transition with the People toolkits. We'll have a quick Q&A with participants. For this, what we would to make the event sort of lively, and we only have allocated one hour and a half. What we will ask you is to post your questions, comments on the chat box as our speakers are presenting the toolkits. We'll collect them and have them comment on those questions, comments at the end of their presentation. And then we'll have 2, but hopefully 3 discussants that they will bring in their perspective on the right to energy and just transitions frameworks from a global south perspective, because bear in mind that these 2 toolkits, they've been done very much with the European perspective, but we want, this has been very clear since the very beginning of the energy poverty, since the beginning of the discussions about the International Energy Poverty Action Week, that we wanted this to be of global relevance. So that's, as you know, the following days will revolve around Asia, Africa, Europe, and Latin America. So this we are introducing this global perspective also on this first day. You can, these are the links to the Engager site, Twitter feed, Facebook page. Thanks for your attention. Now it's over to Marlies Hesselman, who will be presenting the Right to Energy Toolkit. Marlies is lecturer in international law at the Department of Transboundary Legal Studies of the University of Groningen, and she has a very substantial teaching experience in the field of international law. She's published widely on international human rights law, access to essential energy services, and as I mentioned before, she's also the co-lead of Working Group 3 with myself. Over to you, Marlies.
Thank you, Sergio. for that introduction, not only to the action, but also to myself. Let me open up my PowerPoint to share with you. Oh, wait. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. Because it's my great pleasure to present to you today the work of, actually, I guess, a year and a half of labor over time, over the time of the pandemic, with a large group of people associated with working group 3 of the Engager Cost Action, which is very much on fostering dialogue, fostering transdisciplinary dialogue, also with an aim of empowering energy poor people, looking at rights. And it was quite soon concluded that in the context of having to draft a deliverable on a toolkit deliverable that was about engaging people on actually engaging in transboundary, transdisciplinary, multi-agency dialogues, that we would focus on this concept of a right to energy, which was actually, well, popping up in a lot of our discussions that we had together over the past years within the cost action, and that we felt together was a very empowering narrative and an empowering way of maybe reframing the dialogue on energy poverty towards including people's interest in more detail. And what resulted then in the past year and a half, let's say, is a co-creation process very much by over 20 Engager researchers, practitioners, whereby the discussions for this were started in Groningen at the early 2020 in a first Right to Energy workshop. And then the toolkit was fleshed out over the course of this year and a half, 2 years, through a number of online working sessions, whereby we work together practically to collect ideas, to talk through what this right to energy means, on paper, in concept, but also very much in practice, and how it could be realized in practice and provide this empowering narrative. And that's then also the main aim of the toolkit. It is to assist scientists, civil society, policymakers, students, media in engaging and taking action on energy poverty through concepts and language of a right to energy. So it's really about finding a way to change narratives in an empowering way and to integrate regular people's interest in policy making better. That's how we came about it. But of course, this toolkit also responds to important developments in practice that were ongoing at this time. Important ones include legislative reforms that took place in EU energy law, really foregrounding action on energy poverty, measurement on energy poverty, and trying to take effective action. But also UN Sustainable Development Goal 7 on universal access to modern, affordable energy services, and practical developments in practice around just transition, decarbonization, maybe also still lingering impacts of austerity measures from the previous financial crisis in some countries, but also more recently impact of COVID-19, whereby we all see that pressure is being put on people in different ways and are making people more vulnerable to energy poverty. We also see in practice a lot of mobilization of civil society, regionally in Europe, but also at national levels and even around the globe, whereby people are seeing that there is a trouble in terms of access to energy, and people are also increasingly engaging in activism on rights-based platforms. So we hope that the toolkit will also provide valuable input to how you can indeed foster and engage on energy poverty through this language. Finally, there are also actually legal developments occurring on the recognition of a right to energy in legal practice. We've seen some examples and debates on this in Europe, in Catalonia, in France, in Greece, but we also see it in other countries. So I think that the toolkit in this sense is very well situated in a number of recent developments. And again, we hope that it can be this springboard for further engagement. This is some of us engaging during one of the working sessions that we had online, and we were a diverse group. We've consisted, for example, of people that have a philosophy background coming at the right to energy through capabilities perspectives. There's Giovanni Frigo on the screen. There's Marielle Veenstra, who has a very strong background in gender and energy poverty. There's also people having worked on energy poverty with people in practice. I look at Inika Antepara, but also Slavica Robic. And we have people that are very strong in communicating on policy and taking action in practice. Marine Cornelis, for example, or Marilyn Smith, who's also here in the session. So we were a diverse group, We work together, gathering ideas, co-creating input. This is one of the ways that we did this, really trying to work through, for example, what is a right to energy, who has it, and how to put it in practice. And can we also come up with some valuable examples of how this may work in practice? The result was this, our toolkit, moving forward on the right to energy in the EU, and indeed trying to find ways to engage on it. In terms of the contents, we have set out, for example, what do we mean by a right to energy, but also how do we put it in practice by identifying those who are responsible for protecting rights. What are really the fundamentals of a rights-based approach? What's the place of energy already in human rights law? And how is it present already in many ways, but perhaps not so well protected? What are also some practical aspects and conceptual considerations of applying universal rights in specific local contexts? Does the right to energy mean the same in every European country or around the world? This is also something that is maybe interesting for discussion later on. But also, what do we mean with terms like access to energy or access to energy services or basic access? And how can we recognize discriminatory practices or inequalities? And how can you redress that through a human rights-based lens? Finally, in the European context, affordability is also very important. So this is why the toolkit pays some particular attention to this. It's not possible to go through all the elements of the toolkit in this short presentation, so I really encourage everybody to read the toolkit as such. But I do want to highlight a few things in this meeting here, and I will start with the last page of the toolkit, which in my view sums up very well what it means to look at energy poverty through a right to energy perspective. So what are really some of the foundations of talking about energy poverty through a rights-based lens? And then a few things are important, I think. The first one is that the right to energy concept really foregrounds each and every person's needs to basic energy. And it sees all individuals finally as the ultimate unit of concern in energy poverty policy making. So that means that it is really always about identifying who's left out. How can you eliminate injustice, disadvantage, or inequality? And it's in that sense an ongoing debate or ongoing evaluation of who is not enjoying access on par with others and maybe needs some additional support or specific forms of protection, or maybe empowerment. A rights-based approach also emphasizes duties, and I think that's a very powerful concept. Obligations for public authorities, for the states, but maybe also others, and it demands that governance is based on this idea of rights and duties towards ensuring everybody's rights of access for all. It also means then establishing useful frameworks by which citizens or representatives can actively call upon the right to energy, for example, by demanding minimum access, affordability, protection against disconnections or other forms of abuse, and for example, question also the use of prepaid meters, which is arising as a serious concern for effective enjoyment of human rights. And then finally, and this is something that I will also say a little bit more about at the end of the presentation, we feel as a group that the right to energy concept can really empower, and it can maybe also help fostering so-called energy democracy, whereby energy systems, energy resources are really within public control. And it helps people through procedural rights to demand also participation, access to information, access to justice and accountability. So people really become active stakeholders, actively involved in what it means to secure access to energy for all. And in that sense, the right to energy would not only be a rallying call, but it can also be a legal concept or a moral imperative. But it's really something where we say this belongs to everybody, and society is together responsible for effectively protecting this, making sure that everybody enjoys what it is that they need. So from this basic concept, it's maybe interesting to highlight a few other things that have been mentioned or have been clarified through the toolkit in a little bit more detail. And the first one is, of course, this maybe obvious question: what is the right to energy, or what do we mean by this right? And then a key concept that we have been debating is it a right to energy, or should we say a right to energy services? What does it actually mean? And there we have chosen this idea of also visible in wider energy poverty debates, is that people do not need energy as such. They need the benefits of energy. They need the types of services that it provides. And that helps them to advance in their life or to enjoy a basic level of well-being, dignity, material well-being, social well-being. And we tie that also to the concept of human capabilities, which is a more philosophical concept, which underpins also human rights protection, whereby it's about achieving a good life, achieving what people value doing and being, and then in that context consider how energy services helps them achieve that. And then a range of energy services often come up in that context, such as energy needs for cooking, for cleaning, for washing, clothes washing, but also personal hygiene, lighting, refrigeration, running water, hot water, space heating, space cooling, or maybe healthcare services at home, and even also issues of being in contact with each other, communication, or having access to information, being able to use the internet, or having some measure of leisure and entertainment, also valuable for personal social development. How can you determine what are necessary energy services? This is a difficult question, but a rights-based perspective would point towards people and also say you should ask people. So it can be done through a deliberative approach, whereby society decides what are necessary energy services in a given context, whilst at the same time also paying attention to certain important empirical standards or base threshold levels or basic concepts that are, for example, affirmed by the World Health Organization. And this is something that I will come back to in a minute in a little bit more detail. What is perhaps interesting to show you is that during one of our meetings on the toolkit, during the Energy Rights Forum last year, we did a small poll with the people participating there, and I think we were about 28, 30 people, asking people there, mostly Europeans, what are necessary household services in your national context, in your opinion, besides some of the obvious ones like heating or cooking. And then we see that a few of these services actually popped up as most important or most immediately relevant, such as refrigeration, having a washing machine, clothes washing, but also these communication aspects. Internet, a mobile phone, being able to use a computer is something that apparently is valued a lot in our modern day society. So this could mean that these are elements to take into account for what it means collectively to enjoy a right to energy or a right to energy services. A similar set of services, interestingly, is actually also visible in the UN Sustainable Development Goal 7 global tracking framework, whereby there is an idea of what are the types of energy services that people progressively would need access to enjoy a decent life. There you see that it starts with very basic type of appliances and services, such as phone charging or lighting, but also starts to include refrigerator, maybe a freezer, means of food processing, a rice cooker, but also ironing, hair drying, and then also water heating or electric cooking. So I think this gives us a basis to start from to decide what are indeed these necessary energy services. But I said it should be complemented. This is also something stressed by the toolkit in combination with the deliberative process with the people. From this, you can start to have an interesting discussion about what are necessary energy services, what is minimally necessary, and what do people need, and as a consequence of a rights-based approach, are also entitled to. So what is this certain amount or basket of energy services that people need to meet personal, material, or social needs? And we acknowledge in the toolkit that it is maybe not possible to establish this in a definite way, because the energy services that people need may be dependent on context. For example, a hot climate or a cold climate, but also personal situations. Not everybody may have the same type of energy services needs, and a rights-based approach would actually acknowledge that, because it looks at people as the ultimate unit of concern. The toolkit also stresses that if we have an idea of what are basic energy services, it may be necessary to talk about minimum energy supply, but calculations or thresholds for minimum energy supply are also difficult and should be viewed with a little bit of caution, because it also very heavily depends on what a household needs, but also the type of energy carriers that are available, electricity or natural gas, and also the energy efficiency of the home or of appliances. And there it can mean that the same set of energy services may require a quite different amount of energy supply, depending on how efficient the appliances are, for example. So that means that there also needs to be a minimum idea or an idea of what is necessary in terms of energy efficiency. And this is also something that the toolkit stresses. It's not just about the services or the supplies, but it's also about minimum energy sufficiency. Finally, like I said already before, the idea is that whilst it is important to take a deliberative approach, it is also possible that a right to energy ties in with important standards, guidelines, empirical evidence on what is necessary in terms of energy services, for example, for warmth or heating. And there, the World Health Organization has issued guidelines that suggest that a minimum indoor temperature of between 18 and 24 degrees, depending on people's personal vulnerability, would be a minimum level of warmth needed. And the same counts for guidelines on indoor air pollution for stoves that could be used in this context. So it's not only about deliberation, there are also bases upon which this deliberation can take place. One of the final elements or last things for the toolkit that was stressed, and like I said, especially important in a European context, but arguably also around the world, is that you cannot enjoy access to energy if you cannot afford the actual services. And for that reason, may be disconnected. Or if you are on a prepaid meter, that you self-disconnect yourself. From a rights-based perspective, it is unacceptable, and this is affirmed also in international human rights law, that people's access to necessary energy services can never be dependent on an ability to pay. That also means that disconnections based on inability to pay should be avoided or even prohibited, right? This is something that is not acceptable from a human rights perspective. Similarly, it means that affordability of energy services needs to be assessed commensurate with people's income, right? So energy is affordable also based on what you can afford within your wider set of income, in a way that you also need to be able to satisfy your other basic needs, including needs that are already recognized as rights as well. So that includes, for example, the right to food, the right to adequate housing, to water, sanitation, to healthcare, to education. And if people's income or means are not sufficient to meet this entire set or bundle of services, then it means that the state may need to intervene. For example, by setting a higher minimum wage, creating better job opportunities, raising social protection floors, but also a just and equitable system could mean that the state intervenes through regulation on costs of connections or of supplies with regulated prices, such as a lifeline tariff or a social tariff, even free energy bans or disconnection or subsidies. Right? So this gives a nice rights-based framework to think about how you would achieve also affordability in a context of human rights. In the toolkit, we have summarized this through a number of great visuals that have been provided by Manon and Smith, whereby we summarize indeed what is meant by access to energy, but also highlight that there are different sources of vulnerability or different access of discrimination that may prevent people's access to energy services on all these counts. So people may not have access to energy supply or to the services that they need based on different grounds of discrimination. It may also be that they lack affordability of energy services, again, due to different sources of vulnerability, including, for example, whether one's house is inefficient in terms of its energy use. But it can also mean that people have an informal tenure status, that they live in an informal community, or that they live in a rental house without a formal rental contract, and for that reason cannot apply for certain benefits. A rights-based approach, because there is such a long history of thinking about non-discrimination, about vulnerability, about inequality and disadvantage, I think has a lot to offer in terms of unpacking all these different reasons for disadvantage and discrimination in much more detail. And human rights law in particular recognizes a quite long list of potential discriminatory grounds that I think in the context of energy poverty deserve to be much more further unpacked, and where also the toolkit can hopefully help in let's say, revealing these different sources or axes of vulnerability. As a final slide, we thought about how to put this right to energy in practice, and not necessarily in terms of very concrete policies, but also in terms of principles that relate to what the group has identified to be a concept of energy democracy. And this idea of energy democracy is closely aligned with the idea of a right to energy, in the sense that it is about foregrounding public control of people, of the public, over energy resources and energy systems, and it demands their transparent management for the good of the whole society, and with a focus on people, not, for example, on profit. This has been a recurring theme within our working group 3 that's very strongly visible, and I think that has translated well into the toolkit as well. This idea of public control means, on the one hand, that the state has a strong role, a regulatory role, and it also has human rights obligations to secure or facilitate that all people in the territory have access to the rights, without discrimination and where necessary with participation of people. So the state is, in that sense, responsible for ensuring that nobody falls through the cracks, so to say. A right to energy can also mean, however, that people from the bottom up actively claim rights and start to engage on implementing the right to energy. And they do so by calling for the things that they need, but they may also rely on certain procedural rights that would normally attach to a right to energy, such as rights to information, right to public participation in decision-making, but also access to justice and ways of demanding accountability and redress. And there in the toolkit, finally, we highlight a number of aspects that we think will help in that respect, such as very strong laws or rights-based consumer protection laws, making sure that you have grievance mechanisms or complaints mechanisms that are well accessible, that you have accessible and transparent data on who sets energy prices in what way, but also, for example, on the number of disconnections, and that there is a role there for persons that can amplify and that can help people to claim their rights, such as ombudspersons, but also grassroots mobilization. That concludes a short overview of the toolkit. There's still much more to say, but I hope this gives a good first impression, and I look forward to the discussion later. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marlies, for this summary of the toolkit. And thanks also to all the co-authors, some of which are with us here today, for all their inputs. I mean, it's been quite a great collective intelligence exercise. And of course, thanks to Marilyn Smith as well, who very much helped us put the toolkit in its final shape, and who's also keeping trolls in control. Sorry about the disruptions in the beginning of the session today. As in this regard, if you can please keep yourselves muted, because the idea is that we to keep this session agile and lively, we are collecting your comments, questions, concerns, reaction to the presentations on the chat box. So if you can please post those on the chat box, then our speakers will respond to those at the end of their presentations. And now it is over to our engaged working group for speakers. So we have here today Professor Katrin Grossman, professor in urban sociology at the University of Applied Sciences in Erfurt. She does various types of research on urban studies, sociological theory, energy poverty, energy policy and housing, social cohesion, migration, conflict, social inequality, and a number of issues, and as is colleague of working group 4, and also Lidia Živčić from the Slovenian NGO Focus. She has a very substantial policy and EU project management experience, and currently she's coordinating the empowerment project, empowering women to tackle energy poverty in urban areas of the Mediterranean. So it is now over to you, Catherine and Lydia, who will present the Engager Toolkit on a just transition with the people. You want to share your screen?
Yeah, thank you. I don't see much. Do you see the right thing now? Yeah. Okay. So thank you for this opportunity to present the final outcome of our working group, and the Engager cost action has been introduced by Sergio, so I won't go into that. Working group 4 was supposed to work on innovation and to introduce path-breaking perspectives to the understanding of energy poverty. In short, we were set out to think outside the box. And this is a picture of one of the first meetings, and you can see that this sometimes requires to write outside the paper. And we will now present some of the main points of this toolkit. When we decided for what we want to produce with this toolkit, we thought we have some aims here, and these are: we want to go beyond the usual triangle of people having small money in their pockets, having inefficient homes, and prices are rising, even though they are very important. But we thought underneath those 3 pillars, are so many more injustices and structural issues to talk about. So we want to present a broader picture behind energy poverty and the just transition principles and bring them into the policy making. Very much in line with what Marlies has just said, this should be a democratized process, not one that sees energy poor people as vulnerable consumers somewhere passively sitting and waiting to be helped, but as citizens who have rights and who should have a say in policy making. Thus, a transition for, not for, but with the people. We think it is necessary to break policy silos. We'll show you a little bit about what that means in a minute, and thus to come up with comprehensive out-of-the-box responses. The authors is quite a list of colleagues here, and I think I've seen some of them also in this meeting. At least I did see Marin Cornelis, who helped us editing this piece and make it as accessible as possible. The toolkit is divided into 6 different chapters. I will present 3 of them, and then Lydia will join and present the other 6 of them. We decided to go chapter by chapter and present the main ideas, the problems addressed, and some of the ideas pointed to in the toolkit. I'll start with the one that is closest to my heart, building renovations. As you said, I'm an urban sociologist, so you can imagine that housing is, of course, a topic close to my heart. Housing and energy inefficient buildings are a core target of any energy poverty reduction policy, rightly so, but often these policies are a bit blind to structural housing market issues. Energy efficiency corrections of buildings hide structural injustices behind housing, urban planning, and territorial development. Because if we find energy poor people constantly in the lowest quality housing stock, this is an outcome of housing market mechanisms. This is not by chance. So why would we expect that after renovations, energy poor people suddenly enjoy living in high quality housing if we don't make sure that they can stay in the upgraded building stock? Solutions, what can you do? Well, renovation policies and strategies must acknowledge housing market mechanisms and their externalities. This first and foremost means we have to prioritize not-for-profit housing. This is, of course, public housing, though public housing companies sometimes in this neoliberal age that we're living in follow also some market principles, and it's not to be taken for granted that public housing always works for the poor. Another idea would be to boost our alternative housing ownership models, such as cooperatives, and to make policies counter speculations. I mean, I would be happy if, at least at the moment, policymakers would see that in part they are fostering speculation through retrofitting. What happens is rents increase, prices increase, evictions occur in the prime locations once the housing stock is retrofitted. And to counter that, you would need to also find alternative financing renovation measures, or even provide free renovation programs, target the low income groups, the renters, including the renters, provide solutions here. And one idea would be that public authorities should act as guarantors for loans. The renovation wave, which is the huge policy in the EU to tackle housing, building renovations, at the moment is a green growth agenda, and it needs to turn into an approach centered around human rights, inclusivity, non-discrimination, and intersectional inequalities. To make sure we achieve this, to retrofit the homes for the energy poor, we need a long-term monitoring that also can see that the measures stay with the energy poor. Second topic. The building part was quite a good example of what we mean by integrated policies, the call for integrated policies, because many building renovation strategies are not integrated policies. They target one issue, upgrade the housing stock. They don't target neighborhood development, they don't target social issues, they don't look at the side effects, the externalities of the policies. So integrated policies, as we want them to occur much more often, would instead look at the drivers of energy poverty and how they are structural and how they interrelate. Strategies need to be integrated across different policy sectors, because these policies are not innocent and working outside of each other, but employment, energy, climate, taxation, welfare, housing, or health policies, they are all interrelated, and you can't provide a welfare policy without at the same time addressing others, or you can implement health policies that at the same time can help other problems. Siloed approaches, unclear mandates, and budget lines lead instead to the dispersion of resources and inadequate results. So what can we do? The EU, which still is an institution that is very good at green growth policies, should become bolder on social issues and tackle the negative side effects. For instance, if implementing carbon taxes, and if they are implemented indiscriminately to energy bills or consumer goods, this is not a social policy, because it can severely increase energy poverty. Strategies need to address the structural drivers. Social bonuses or bill support schemes, as we have them, very often fail to address underlying issues, though at the moment especially they might be very much needed as an emergency measure. The energy We also suggest to have an energy poverty impact assessment of EU-funded projects and strategies. We know these things, they already occur or happen with gender or environmental impact, and we see here that indicators can help grasp, understand, counteract negative externalities. National intersectional energy poverty task forces. This could be a body that coordinates the actions of each government, department, and ministry, and is thus responsible for framing and harmonizing the efforts at all levels. So this much for integrated policies. And finally, from my side, and then I hand over to Lydia, ombudspersons. Mali's already mentioned them. They exist in every in the country in Europe. I'm sorry. They exist within Europe on the national level. Why do we need them, and why do we need them to work much more effectively? Because distrust in private and state institutions is widespread among energy poor people. This has also been an academic outcome of our working group, showing how this distrust works, where it comes from, and how, and this is the decisive part, how it limits the coping capacities of people. Energy issues remain highly technical, complex, tariffs and deals lack transparency, many energy suppliers practice aggressive canvassing. Thus, energy rights remain unenforced, energy users are denied justice, and energy citizens therefore need a champion to echo their voice. Ombudsperson could be this champion. It's their job to enforce citizens' rights related to energy services. But just as an anecdote, I happened to learn that in Germany we have such ombudsperson only through the work in the last years, which basically means they are not publicly well known, and their work is way too limited. To empower them, we would need them to operate independently from governance, regulators, businesses. We need to increase their capacity. That it means they need the resources. They need to establish collaborative links with other entities and maybe even an international network. And the access to ombudsmen need to be broadened. The info needs to be much more widely spread, like also using simple tools, simple language, radio, television spots, and the like. And I'll hand over to Lydia.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, the first chapter from my side of the presentation would be enabling the enabler. And what is it that we're talking about? We looked at the frontline workers, such as social workers working with people in the field, such as health nurses working in the homes of their patients and so on. So we were looking at what they can do to help us tackle energy poverty. The problem currently is that they lack expertise. They have this very siloed approach, and they also lack time and other resources or even mandate to actually tackle energy poverty. There's also a very high level of disconnection between the different institutions that are in charge of the frontline workers, and bringing them together could be benefit for tackling energy poverty. So the solutions would be upskilling or training those who are already there in the field to help people affected by energy poverty. We would need to have frontline staff having a broader knowledge about energy poverty. We would need something like, we called it energy social worker. So a social worker that knows something technical about energy, but we also would need, let's say, electricity engineer who knows something about social issues, so who knows how to approach people in a way that it's very acceptable and beneficial for the people. Also, we would be benefiting from having local help desks and one-stop shops that can help the different frontline staff to exchange knowledge and information between them, as well as bring information to the people affected by energy poverty. And we definitely need this cross-sectoral, cross-institutional cooperation so that all these different actors can learn from each other. For example, in the empowerment that Sergio mentioned before that I'm coordinating, it's called Empowerment. We are trying to address health staff working in the field with energy poverty, with sick people or people that have disabilities, but they know nothing about energy poverty. And now we're training them about it, and it's like a new world for them because they've never heard about the problem, although they are seeing it in the field every day. So next slide, please, Katrin. Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. It seems it's the same text from the slide before, so you can meanwhile look at the different picture, but I'll tell you about the next chapter, which is about different, better and fairer jobs. Namely, the problem now is that we have very often precarious employment situations and also low quality and poorly paid jobs that actually kind of keep people in the loop of poverty, of vulnerability, not only individuals, but even whole communities. We fear that actually Green Deal as it's set up right now could perpetuate these balances. At the moment, the new jobs that are promised or are created are mainly, well, so to say, it's jobs for healthy men and people who are affected by energy poverty, people who are, let's say, less educated or are in communities that are distant to good jobs and working places, though they are not going to benefit so much from the Green Deal jobs as the healthy men, so to say. This is why we need specific push, we need specific focus of Green Deal on green jobs, which would be for vulnerable people and communities. We need upscaling, we need education and training, we need coaching and mentoring for people that need to upgrade their job skills so that they can actually match the demands of the green jobs that are currently being developed with the Green Deal and also its subsequent package of Fit for 55. We would need those jobs for specifically for people suffering from energy poverty or that are currently without jobs. It would be beneficial to have also tax incentives for so-called green jobs. And it would be very, very necessary to put the social impact actually at the core of the business model of many companies, because right now this is sometimes a side effect, but most of the companies are having or following the profit motives, which are very often in a direct contradiction with the social impact. So having quality jobs, having job security, and so on and so on. Also, the renovation wave should look to support creation of small and medium-sized social impact businesses rather than just big companies, especially in the areas where jobs are scarce and the communities are deprived. Katrin, if I could ask you please for the next slide. Yeah, and this is the last chapter. It's about, as we started actually, about energy transition with the people, not for the people. Namely, people are independent agents. They're not only consumers, they're citizens with rights, they're citizens with experiences, citizens with knowledge. And the companies, especially energy companies, are sometimes forgetting about that and treating people merely as consumers that can be tricked into higher tariffs, even though they don't need them, and so on. This is why the business model should be changed and oriented more towards people instead of being oriented to the company's shareholders. It's now time to democratize energy. We need more direct democracy. We need more transparency. We need more open dialogue and consultations between especially the energy companies and people for whom this energy is supposed to be. We need the redistribution of earnings. In the last price crisis that we're facing now, we're seeing people having to choose between eating and heating. But if we go a few months back, we see that especially energy companies were reaping huge profits without decreasing prices. So this situation has to change, and earnings should be redistributed. Products and services of the companies should be co-designed with citizens so that they can actually better match their needs. Energy communities and energy cooperatives should be made more accessible, should be made more democratic, should be made actually useful and beneficial also for people affected by energy poverty, who would normally not have enough means to actually join an energy community and to contribute for, let's say, photovoltaic power plant or something like that. There's more and more cases in the field that show that this is possible, so this should be the way forward. Of course, promoting citizens' engagement, bigger transparency, and bigger or better access to information would be beneficial in the field of energy supply. And also more research has to be performed on understanding how people can be engaged better. And if we can go to the last slide, we basically wanted to say that with the toolkit, that the drivers of energy poverty are deeply structural, and they go beyond this traditional triangle of low income, high prices, and poor buildings. They go into our social policies, they go into employment policies, health, tax, basically name it. The toolkit was even too small to actually list all the connections that we would need to look into. Most of you probably belong to the groups that for whom we meant this toolkit to be. So I urge you to use it and actually in the further steps expand it beyond itself, expand it to different sectors. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lydia and Katrin. We're running a bit late, so thanks so much to all of you that have been interacting through the chat box. Very lively discussion over there. A number of links have been shared, resources. I hope you can have a look at them sometime. I would very quickly ask our three speakers to perhaps get back on respond to a few comments, questions that that came up in the chat box. So I picked two just in the interest of time. One question for clarification for Lydia about so Vidushi Dembi was asking the relevance of taxes for green jobs. If you could please elaborate on those and the implications for the overall topic, just transition with the people. And then Carla from the UK stating posing this question about these universal standards and the tension with the fact that right to energy has to be shaped by participatory consults, and the risk of setting scale that is tilted in favor of a global minority, that is the ones that are already quite privileged and are represented by Western development agencies. Harriet Thompson responded to that, referring to the example of the WHO's indoor temperature guidelines that were set up sometimes in the 1980s, and we are still referring to. So I don't know if Lydia, Marlis want to quickly respond on those. I mean, for the right to energy toolkit, we've struggled with that, making how to define standards that are contextually sensitive and relevant. Lydia, you want to go ahead?
Yes, perhaps, because actually I'm already expected in the next meeting, for which I apologize deeply, but you can find my contacts on the website that I shared in the chat, so you can feel free to contact me also afterwards. Yeah, thank you for the question. It is actually a much bigger question that I can tackle right now. The core idea beyond it would be that we would reduce some of the taxes or social contributions for the so-called green jobs, so that by doing this, we would make them more interesting for the employers. However, this would have to go in context into in line with discussion about greater tax reform, where discussions are going in the direction of transferring tax burden from the employment to the use of natural resources and energy. And of course, also introducing more taxes on wealth, and especially also more progressive taxes on wealth. The wider discussion is also about how to make our tax system mistake-proof or escape-proof. Right now, we are seeing many multinational companies escaping the paying of taxes, and this is also one part of the discussion. If we manage to get this done and right, we can probably also get more budget income for supporting green jobs. This much in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.
Thanks. Should I? Yeah, I'm happy to respond to the comment about international standards versus deliberative processes. And I fully agree that it seems that there is a contradiction there, which I think is something that does not just plague the toolkit, but that plagues also debates about human rights in general. Because there is seemingly this tension about wanting to do something that is universal, but also realizing that people have different preferences, needs, etc. The reason this is, I think, the reason why the toolkit says that there needs to be two approaches. On the one hand, in my view, it can be helpful to have international standards as referencing points, not as the final truth and the final say. But as something to deliberate on as a starting point. And it may well be that indeed the World Health Organization temperature guidelines are not longer to be viewed as the correct ones. Maybe there's better science, or there's different experiences of people saying we can do with less warmth, or we need more warmth. And I think a deliberative approach would say that, but whilst recognizing that there is a basis for discussion. And for me, this is an interesting approach because it could maybe also guard against what is sometimes called in the literature objective positionality, or problems around people's position. For example, in the field of these human capabilities theories, whereby there is an idea that you can either set a list of things that you universally want to aspire to, or you leave it all up to people to discuss amongst themselves. People that are confronted with situations of extreme poverty may not recognize their disadvantage, or may not always see how lives could be better or could be improved, or what it is that they may actually could have a right to. And I think the combination of approaches would help this. But it's very interesting to debate this further, and it is a problem that needs to be somehow undercut. Yeah.
Thank you, Marlis. Yeah, and actually this brings us to the next, the final part of this session, which is precisely about incorporating global perspective, and more specifically global South perspectives on what has been presented by Catherine, Marlis, and Lydia. Bear in mind that these toolkits were produced in the context of the Engager Cost Action, which is primarily a research and action network in Europe. So we are aware that many of the discussions and key arguments and proposals for policy action on the toolkits are suited to European conditions. So that's why we wanted to have the discussants from beyond Europe to tell us their views about their thoughts, to share their thoughts about these two toolkits. So we have today two, I think it's only two. I'm not sure if Tavi could make it finally, who would be our third discussant today, but she's doing field work in South Africa. So we have with us today Carla Cedano Villasencio, who is doctor in engineering applied sciences and the head of technology management at the Renewable Energies Institute of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She's also Chief Administrative Officer of FEMIE Sol, coordinator of Red Solar, and president of the National Association of Solar Energy in Mexico. With us is also David Kabanda, who is founder and executive director of the Center for Food and Adequate Living Rights in Uganda. David is a human rights lawyer and also a food health and adequate living rights practitioner in East Africa, with years of experience in advocating on social and economic rights, including on electricity access. So I would the two questions that we have asked our discussants today to answer are these: what are your views on these two toolkits from a Global South perspective, and in which ways can or cannot the specific proposals of the toolkits be applied to non-European contexts? So I would ask Carla to share their views on this. I think you want to share a few slides, right?
Yes, I will. Thank you. I'm loving the conversation because I think that several questions that have been posed previously open very well the way that we would like to talk about it. And first, I want to talk briefly about Mexico and start with, it is a land of contrasts. And I think the things you saw in the news, the people who know a little bit of my country, we have enormous contrast. One of the richest men in the world is a Mexican industrialist. And we also have intense poverty. So inequalities is part of the way we talk. So thinking of standard measures is always a problem in our country because we are one of the most important economies. We are an OECD country. So, however, and here is the point, about energy access, we do have 91.5% of the population has access to electricity. That's a fact. However, there is at least 7% of energy production in my country, which is a lot because it's considering industrial, commercial, and residential services, is recognized to be non-technical losses. That means that that energy is received by persons who don't pay for it. So then we start asking ourselves, how much is that? And here is the data, energy poverty data. Since 2018, there have been some statistics that we're working with them. They're mostly income-related statistics, and the official number is that 11% of the population is in energy poverty, and they use the 10% measure. So all of you know that that was the worst way possible to address what energy poverty means in my country. It's the official data. However, the academic community, we've been trying and working in different groups, and we can say that, and here we start with a contrast. In Spanish, the word is depende. It depends. We use that a lot because it's between 30 and 40%. And we could say that there's also something else that we decided to put forward in another paper that is extreme energy poverty. And we use that term to try to compare that energy poverty to the energy poverty that the Global South normally refers to, or to be fair, that the Northern South, the Global North refers to the Global South. So in those regards, Mexico is in like 17% of extreme energy poverty. So, as I'm telling you, it is amazing that with such important coverage from the electricity grid, we have such an extreme in energy poverty. And just to make things more complicated, because that's the interesting things in our countries, is that we are under constitutional reforms as we speak. Right now, Mexico, from September the 30th, there is a new proposal of energy reform that will affect the previous reform, which is quite new. The last reform was 2013. And in that reform, everything changed because we have a state-owned and controlled energy system. And 2013 was the year when there was an open regulated market. Not completely open, we had independent regulators, but now the proposal is to return the control to the state and to have the regulators obviously change the structure and put them under the state control. Also, in the 2013, there was an active promotion of clean energy, but based only on economic advantage, which is not exactly the promotion of clean energy in Rio. And then nowadays, the new proposal says that the state has to own at least 54% of the generation of the electricity in Mexico, and the privates can get up to 46, but it's just, but the dispatch hierarchy will be based on state priorities. The state lands have to dispatch with priority over the private owned. So that changed the shift completely. And also in regard to the investment in research, development and innovation spaces and things and academic and companies, in the previous reform, we had a very important proportion of money devoted to the hydrocarbons and very little to energy sustainability. And now they just, without giving any number, it's just stated in this new proposal, a promotion to clean transition. That's that. And finally, in 2013, there's no mention on energy poverty, while in this new proposal, energy is thought as a human right, and it's called to be an attention to energy poverty. So as you might see, it's a very contrasting, complex situation. You cannot say which thing is better or worse because they both have this intertwined. What is very good is that all of this opened a broader conversation. We are now, it's been 5 months since that publication came from the president of our country, and we're still in the discussion. We're opening discussion, and that is always good because we have been able to understand things. And now talking about the brief, I have to give just a sigh of despair to the extinct EPO. For us, what you do in Europe is a great source of inspiration, and of course, it gives us a way to be able to examine what you have done, and it's an example of things that we want to do and don't want to do. So during a while, we, all of the academic community that were into energy poverty, and we started convincing some persons in the political arena thanks to energy poverty, so EPO. EPO was an incredible tool that helped us a lot. However, there's no EPO. So now I talk about the brief, and thank you for the brief, because now we have a toolkit where we can try to engage in a new conversation, because it's a refreshing conversation, even though we've been having these different moments with different stakeholders in Mexico, in different governments. This constitutional reform is bringing the attention again. And also last month, or a couple of months ago, a very well-known organization, a non-profit oriented organization, and non-governmental also, published a report on energy poverty, which doesn't include all the academic studies that we've been doing, but most importantly, puts a bridge between social instances, political instances, and the academy. So I think that that's very important. And just regarding the toolkit, I can tell you that, of course, specifically in the 6 points that you tackle very cleanly and nicely put, because I have to thank you. It's like it's very easy to read, and that's always helpful to all of us. So first of all, about intersectional policies, the energy reform discussion is like we're in tune with that, so we can engage with the conversation that is taking place overseas here in Mexico. About enabling the enabler, there are several programs working on what we're calling promotores energéticos comunitarios, that is energy promoters in communities. And there are very small, not well funded, but there's the idea that might help. So looking abroad and being that there is an active examples and an active promotion of enabling the enablers in these communities gives us hope and tries us to make us to prove a point here in Mexico. Energy transition with the people, of course, we are engaged with that a long time ago, but the most important thing is that it's easy to be said, but very difficult to do it. We have programs from our National Council on Science and Technology to do what is called democratización energética. It's a program in itself, but there have been non-projects financed by that because it is a very complicated concept, as you know. And here, with so many struggles, we're struggling to understand how to be able to put that forward. So we need a lot more of examples to try to draw what is understandable from that place and criticize what is not. Also, we need integrated policies, as you state, and I think that this interest that these very, let's say, very non-academic spaces have put the thing of energy poverty, the concept, in the news. They're working to it. They've been able to get recognition from other organizations that work through, and they have put in place the thing about energy and energy transition, and particularly how vulnerable communities are suffering it in Mexico. So I think that even though we're not near integrated policies, we think that that is the space to be working with. About the better and fairer jobs, unfortunately in Mexico, since we have these conflicting public policy spaces, 2013 promoting clean energies, and now this kind of changing the rules. So there is a lot of unemployed talent in Mexico. We've been, let's say, teaching in our schools, in our universities, persons for engineering spaces, maintenance, operation, technicians, to be part of the energy transition. But since there's a stalled because of these discussions, we have them unemployed. So we have there an issue of, we recognize the importance of that, but we're not able to put it forward. And finally, about the ombudspersons, which is necessary, and we get it that if it's necessary in your countries where, let's say, there is a higher level of accountability, and we want to believe, of course, of livelihood levels. Here I can only put 3 little dots, because there is not even the faintest clue that we need that. As a matter of fact, the state, if the new government goes through with the policy they're looking for, to have the control of everything, they believe that they will be the ones, the government, the federal government, will be the ones that will defend and will put forward the interest of the communities. So we, especially that part, the vision of a state that thinks that if they control all the energy generation transition, because the energy transition is also in this new reform put in front as the most important space to be led only by the government. So this intersectional, this way of discussion could go sour if it goes forward. So the toolkit, even though, and I also have to state this with very carefully, even though many persons in my country could think that we cannot learn from Europe, we know we can. We know that you have traveled different spaces. Not everything is, we're not going to take that and put it as a jacket in ourselves, because not even you can put it as a jacket in your country. There's also a diversity of cultures and of contexts in Europe, but we can internalize the learning lessons. And this type of toolkits that put up front and that are able to bring bridges are very helpful. So I think that, I thank that, because there was a void in that space since IPO died, or whatever happened to IPO, because I haven't been able to have a complete and full response of what happened to IPO. But since that's not there, this toolkit is really amazing. And of course, you will receive a lot more of feedback from us when we work with it more fluently as a whole community in my country.
Thank you, Carla. I mean, it's inspiring to see how the work we've done can be useful outside Europe, but we understand, and that's why we're discussing here what doesn't necessarily apply to other contexts. So I wonder if David Cabanda, you can give us your views in 7 minutes about the toolkits. To what extent do you think it can be useful for a context such as the one you come from, you know?
Thank you so much, Sergio, and I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this discussion. Greetings to all of you. Forgive my background. I'm just coming from court. We are preparing the court against the EACOP. You have heard about the East African crude oil pipeline. Again, trying to make sure that people get clean energy instead. Now, I'll start from a point of congratulating you all for having worked on a very beautiful toolkit. I was reading through, I had a benefit of reading through it before it was finalized, and then looking at it the way it is. All topics are very exciting. But allow me to start from a point where I want to encourage us to work so much to have what we call the core content. Because in many of our countries, we find that when you bring in a human rights based approach and you talk about the right to energy, for example, if you went to court today, the first question they'll ask you, what is the definition? What are the elements? How is it, defined in international law? I know a lot of work has been done here, but if we can work also towards having, for example, a general comment for example, which can help in articulating some of the elements. I'm very happy I've looked at the toolkits. They bring out all those elements, but somewhat the first question, for example, in our countries is it from a human rights? Is it a UN supported? Yes, I agree. There is Article 14 of the UN Women's Convention, and then but the point I'm trying to make is, if we can work so hard to have, for example, a general comment, would really be we would have done and solved many questions. Now, I want to give a comment on enabling the enabler. I was reading here and I was like, Engage should already come to Africa. I'm speaking from a country which only has 24% electrification, and even the 24%, you can only find 7% having access. So you clearly see what I'm talking about. Then from individual households, we have public service places like hospitals. I have been litigating a case where 160 children died in just 1 week because of electricity cuts. And vaccines went bad, and that is just one hospital. And when I went before the court, this high court judge it just said, you look here, that is a contractual issue, it is a commercial issue, the exact things that the toolkit is trying to, to elaborate. How I wish I had it then, and then I put it before him. And he threw out my case, and then we appealed. Then we were faced with COVID, and the appeal has not yet been solved. So the point I'm trying to make is, we can use this toolkit to be able to bring on board many other lawyers, human rights lawyers, because, for example, in Uganda, it is only me now who is working on this issue. Other lawyers don't see it as a human rights issue. They look at it as just a commercial transaction issue. If you don't have electricity, or if you don't have clean energy, it is your issue. Maybe you are poor. That is how they look at you. And they are forgetting that the structural bottlenecks are pulling many people out of access and affordability issues. And the government, you see, in the toolkit, you talk about policies. In my country, and largely Africa, many things are interesting. For example, we have different policies when it comes to generation of electricity. Then you have different policies on transmission of electricity. Then you have different policies when it comes to distribution of electricity, and other different policies when it comes to billing. And we have seen a lot of fraud, even to the few people who can be able to pay for electricity. There's a lot of fraud because there is no coherence when it comes to laws and policies that govern energy access in many places. So having a toolkit that tries to bring sense of how an integrated policy and law can help access is really a very good toolkit. I also want to speak about section 19, for example, which is talking about building citizens' trust. The ombudsman's person in Uganda and in East Africa generally, I can talk about the human rights, the National Human Rights Commission. Those commissions are supposed to make sure that they look into issues of human rights violations. And why am I suggesting this is because, for example, we have Electricity Regulation Tribunal, which has never sat. Even when people take cases there, the few people who can afford to go there and take cases, they take ages to even be, heard. So having such human rights commissions that can look into issues of fraud, into issues of equity, into issues of social exclusion, bringing the citizen not as a spectator or someone who is worked upon, but a participant, it will really be nice. And I'm very happy that these discussions are coming up. And another thing that I would want Engager and EU to work on, these funding mechanisms that we have. For example, World Bank, we have some projects of World Bank where they say, okay, we are going to electrify like 2 districts. But what they forget, what they don't do is a social impact assessment or a social assessment before such projects. In one of the instances last week, I had to intervene in a case where they had brought electricity poles and they had left out some old women in the village. And even when I intervened that these old women must be given electric poles and their houses be connected, the project does not allow to wire their houses. So they bring electric pole to your house, but the cost of wiring your house and maybe see light or get charging of your phone or your radio, all that cost is on you. And at average, it goes to like $300. So you find that people cannot afford. So these big projects from maybe World Bank should also be able to do an assessment of how social exclusion and poverty will obstruct access to electricity. I want to thank you so much. Those are my views. And I think it is a very wonderful discussion that we can have. Africa has only 40% coverage of clean energy. And maybe what I want us to clearly articulate is when we talk about energy poverty, are we talking about any other energy? Because the definition is resources and services. So someone would be asking, what if I have wood? Because it is a source of energy. Is that applicable in the African setting? Because many of the people access energy through wood and charcoal, which is not sustainable, which is not smart, which is endangering health. So I think a more articulate definition when we talk about energy poverty, what do we mean? That will make a lot of inroads into the African context. I want to thank you so much for having given me this opportunity to share with you and also speak with you. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, David. That's great having you with us, and really fascinating insights from a country like Uganda, the connection between health and electricity access, the impacts you were talking about when a hospital stops having electricity, the sort of implications in terms of public health it has. I mean, the sheer dimension of the health impact is something that it's difficult to capture in a document that we've written with drafted thinking, having in mind Europe in mind, or the issues about the low electrification rates, the prevalence of firewood in some areas, which is also the case in some parts of Europe as well. But how did the proposals of the toolkit apply to those contexts? That's I think that's something to really challenging. We just passed 2 minutes of the planned end of our session. So I would perhaps, if Marlis or Catherine or Carla want to do a very final sort of statement about issues that have been said, that'd be great. Otherwise, I think let's not delay the end of it anymore. Would you like to any final statement about the issues we've been discussing? Carla has raised her hand.
Just a very fast one. I only wish that the toolkit had a more in-depth issue on gender and vulnerability. I think that would be a chapter that is needed to address both in your context and overall. So I think that is something that would be very interesting to see in a second part of the toolkit. So that's it. But thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, Carla. Catherine, Marlis, please.
Yeah, just shortly. I'm really surprised. I didn't even expect that this toolkit would raise any interest beyond Europe, and it's interesting to see what you pick. And I think the the interesting thing is to look at the drivers and to see how these injustices actually come about. What are the lines of power that keep people dependent and in a very limited position concerning their life chances? I think that that's somehow the underlying question among beneath what we did and what could be expanded. And yes, Carla, of course, it's selective. There are a lot of issues not addressed. Sorry about that. And thank you for your comment that gender would be worth a chapter. I'll take it to the group.
Thank you. Marlies, please go ahead. Final word.
Yeah, thanks everyone for great inputs and great reactions. And I think what we had hoped to do with the Right to Energy Toolkit is also to have a start of a debate on this together. And we have tried as well as possible with our group to define what we think it means based on our research, based on our insights. But it is, I think, a discussion that is still very much at the beginning in a way as well. So I hope that the toolkit invites this talk, this people standing up and articulating what the right to energy means for them. In my own research, legal research, I can see people going to court indeed increasingly, trying to flesh out the legal content, what David was also calling for, can we get better legal content? But I think it is a process which will go on for the coming years, and I look forward to discuss with everybody here more. Yeah.
Thank you, Marlies, and all the speakers really for a great session. I mean, we go on the Engager cost action, have a few more months until May. Please keep an eye on the website. And we also invite you for sure to the International Energy Poverty Action Week's sessions for the following days. You know, every day at around 3 p.m. Central European time, there's one session. Tomorrow is the regional focuses in Latin America. The session is titled "The Right to Energy Policy Frameworks and Knowledge Gaps." Conocer es resolver. So lots of discussion about data and knowledge and understanding of what energy poverty is in the Latin American and Caribbean context. We'll have Carla Fedano as one of the speakers tomorrow, along with other three speakers, and it will be chaired by Harriet Thompson, who is co-lead of the Engager Working Group 2, and she's from the University of Birmingham. So we really hope that you can make it tomorrow and the following days of this International Energy Poverty Action Week. Thanks again for coming here today. I hope you enjoyed it and have a good rest of the day, everyone. We are done here.